Martin Balluch is active in animal rights in Austria, followed by a number of years in the UK, and since then running reform campaigns for the group VGT in Austria, with a number of successes. In 1999, he established the Austrian Vegan Society, which has been running successfully ever since. However, this talk will not be dedicated to any of the many successes. Martin is going to talk about a failure instead. This topic will be about an election campaign for animal rights in the Austrian Parliament. So I pass the microphone to you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for introducing me. Thank you for coming and being interested in my topic, which is a bit different maybe to most other topics. I'm not trying to convince, or I'm not reporting about a campaign to try to convince people to turn vegan or to support us in getting a ban on a certain animal abusive practice, but it's actually to convince them to vote for me, which is a new interesting aspect that I never sort of tackled. But I briefly start out with saying who I am. I was told I should. I have been actually a mathematician and physicist for 12 years at different universities. And in 1985, I started being active for animal rights. I founded a small group against vivisection then. And since 1997, I'm a full-time activist, also employed and long-standing president, as it might be called, of VGT, this Association Against Animal Factories. Our group is founded in 1992 and runs political campaigns for reforms, but not only. There's also a lot of positive outreach. We have now a 1.6 million euro budget a year, 50 employees. It's based on very non-hierarchical approach, so that the groups can actually do what they want, produce their own leaflets, and there's no corporate identity at all. And there is no possibility of any single person to tell anyone else what to do. It has to be a decision based on talks and compromise. We do about 1,000 demos, 150 actions and 50 events a year. But now I'm coming to my topic, which is trying to get animal rights into parliament. The first time I heard of this was from the Dutch political party, the Party for the Dieren. I don't know how it's rightly pronounced. And it was founded, I believe, by Marianne Thieme, who we then invited to our, I think, first Animal Rights Congress in Austria in 2002, I believe. And she came and gave a talk and spoke about how their party is going, and it sounded all very interesting. So we did start think about doing the same in Austria. But eventually, after long debates, most people within the movement decided that it was not a good idea and not a good way of spending their time. But still, a tiny minority of activists founded a party that they eventually named after different names, Human Environment Animal Party. It did try to get into the elections, which is not so easy because you have to get a lot of signatures in each district. And so they actually managed that only in a number of districts in Vienna, and in those districts they had votes of less than 1%. But one has to say that the support was very small from the movement. This party possibly still exists, but it is not actually running. The thing that I found so strange is that we have vast majorities for certain demands in animal welfare. And why should there be only fewer than 1% people voting for it? It doesn't feel like this when you are out on an info stall, so many people coming, talking to you. We have 22,000 members in VGT who support us with donations. So there is a big mood in favor of animal welfare at least. So why isn't it possible to have a party for that demand and get enough votes to get into parliament? In Austria, in order to get into parliament, you need 4% of the votes, and then you get 8 members of parliament in one go. But if you have less than 4% of the votes, you get nil members of parliament. So there are 180 MPs in Austria, so it would actually be enough to have 0.75% in order to get in, but you have this 4% hurdle. Recently, we did an opinion poll, a professional, expensive, representative opinion poll, and it said 96% of the people in Austria want straw for pigs, which pigs don't have because they have to live on the slatted floor. But 96% want that, and it's not there. So one could have thought we need, what we need is a vote. We need it that the people are able to vote on those issues. Then we would have vast steps ahead in animal welfare. So basically the idea was still there. Couldn't we try somehow to get a party? I mean, in the debates on the party, we had a number of positives and a number of negatives. The positives are you get a lot of money from the state. If you become an MP, then the state pays you actually the salary for, I think, 5 people to support you. And that would be essentially for each MP who is an animal MP, that would be a gigantic boost of the budget. Secondly, we would have access to parliament, which means we can do applications, we can put forward bills to vote, we have the information, and we can give talks in front of the government. Thirdly, on many issues, it would be possible to have majorities. So maybe it would be possible to have advances in animal rights or in animal welfare. And we could put animals well on the topic of, on the agenda of elections campaigns, because in Austria at least, and I suppose in other countries it's similar, that usually the elections are running certain topics and placards and debates in TV that never mention animals. Animals are just not on the agenda at all. And if there's an animal party that is big enough to be in parliament, I would expect there to be debates on animal policy as well in the election campaigns. And people can vote for a voice for animals, which they often say when you speak to them on the information stall. They say, just go to parliament, I want to vote for you. I don't want to donate maybe money, but I would give you my vote. Okay, but what are the disadvantages? Firstly, and that is not to be underestimated, that other parties become political enemies. At the moment, we are trying to speak to at least almost all parties to support our demands. And if we were, or somebody was, a political party, then I would expect that the other parties would shun from them and wouldn't really want to cooperate. On the other hand, you could sort of push them to develop animal agendas themselves. Maybe that would work, but at least you couldn't cooperate as you do now, as we do now. Then we don't have money for election campaigns. I mean, if you get donations for VGT or for animal issues, you can't just use that for an election campaign. So we would have to raise money for a political election campaign. And I think this is not a very good topic for getting donations. At least if you aren't, if you can't sort of tell big companies that you will do policies that will help them get bigger profits. This is usually why anybody donates for election campaigns, but not for animals. Then NGOs must stay politically independent. That's very clear, at least to most people in most NGOs. So you can't attach them to a party. So even VGT would have to say to an animal political party to treat them like they treat all other parties. And yeah, and what do you say about non-animal issues? If you're a political party in parliament, then obviously you have to have an opinion on all topics that are being debated there. And why should somebody vote for you if you then have an opinion that doesn't conform with them, with their attitudes on other topics, on human rights topics or whatever else? So it's not easy to develop a complete political program for a party that actually has only one common ground, which is animal welfare or possibly animal rights. You could also think about founding a party that is only vegan and 100% animal rights, but that would be such a fringe minority who is, I think, who would be supporting this party, that I don't think it's any use to spend your money on this, your time and money and energy on this, because you wouldn't get anywhere. If you found a party, you want to get real political power and get into parliament. Everything else seems to me to be a waste. Okay, But now suddenly we had an option, which just came to a surprise to all of us. Last year in September 2019, there was a parliamentary election in Austria, and the Green Party had split in two. One was the classic Green Party, and the other part, small group, they wanted to also stand for elections, and they asked us for support. They invited me to speak with them, and they offered to make half of the party into an animal party. Essentially, the party was called Now, and you could say Animal Rights Now, like in this picture on our action. This was an Animal Rights Now action, and we would essentially have half the party as an animal party and the other half as a green party. We debated if we should do that or shouldn't. A number of other famous, under quotes, because nobody who is an animal activist is actually famous, but famous Austrian activists also said they would stand for election if we decided, and eventually we did. The advantage was that we didn't have to collect signatures to be able to stand for the election, but there were MPs supporting this party, and if 3 MPs sign, then you can stand for election in the whole federal Austria. So that was easy. It was only a matter of running an election campaign and trying to get the votes. And so we said, why not? At least some of us said it or not. I mean, within VGT, there was opposition. Some people said we shouldn't do that. But I mean, I decided for myself, I'm doing this without the support of VGT, and we just tried out. One main reason was that I had I'm a bit famous in Austria since I've been acting for a long time, and there was this big animal rights trial where I was sort of the primary charged person, and I was found not guilty. So 30% of the population in Austria connect my name with animal welfare or animal rights. So at least there was a basis for sort of standing for elections in some way. And also, it is truly my daily experience in Austria. If I travel, even if I walk in the mountains or if I travel with the underground, every day a number of people, just alien people to me, come to me and say, hello, Martin Balluch, how are you? Well done, good on you, keep on fighting. So you get the impression the whole society is supportive, and there are lots of people who know you. So why not stand for elections? Okay. So we wrote an election, or I did actually write an election animal program, which is these 5 pages. And the whole party had climate change and animal protection as the first and second primary goals. So this was the main part of this program. Yeah, and so how do you run an election campaign without any funds? There was a lot of people supporting me, but a lot of people were really opposed to it as well. But within the movement, there were quite a few supportive people. And I eventually put my whole energy, or most of my energy, into producing campaign videos. So short 5-minute video clips. At the end, there were 38. And these video clips we put on whatever social media channels and boosted them a bit with money. There was very little money, but 15,000 euro eventually was spent on boosting those videos. And they just made the point that I'm standing for election and that I'm fighting for animals, and that they should sort of vote for me. These 4 pictures you can see here on the screen are 4 examples of those films. And just to give you an idea what these films are about, I will speak about these 4 films as an example. So the left upper one was actually a music piece, a rap song on animal protection and animal rights. And this is a screenshot during this rap. You see me singing on the right, and this pig, the poor pig on the left. And it was, trying to sort of get this angle in as well at the message. The picture on the right, on the upper one, I am with another politician who was standing for the election and who was actually claiming to be in favor of animal welfare. I put her in cardboard with me, and I went in the night into a factory farm of pigs on a slatted floor. And I talked with her on this, inside this factory farm at 3 in the morning. And I sort of, I explained to her how it looks like here and that she should be opposed to factory farming. And essentially, she wasn't really in favor of animal welfare, and it was just a joke. One of these election hoaxes that parties generally do in order to get votes. And so in that way, I tried to make that obvious in public. So these videos that I show you here actually ran very well. They had up to 300,000 views. On the left below, I am standing outside a turkey farm, and I'm explaining the misery of the turkey birds in there and showing as well a lot of footage from inside the farm. And on the right below, just to give you an idea that I also talked about climate change and animals, I'm standing on a glacier in Austria, and I'm showing how much this glacier is retreating. And that just 20, 30 years ago, when I'm a mountaineer, when I was there, all these rocks were underneath the ice. And now I'm standing on the ice and all these rocks are outside. And here you can very clearly see the effect of climate change that is mostly due to, or in a very large part due to meat production or animal production. So this was the primary part of this election campaign. But on the other hand, there was the very positive effect that animals became really a topic. And that was because I was essentially with other MPs, so essentially in a party within parliament without actually being in parliament, but they had to listen to us a lot more because we were within parliament and not just a small fringe group outside. And so I was invited to television debates between the spokespeople of the parties on animal issues and also on climate issues. And that was dreadful actually, because these people, they all were very wary of me because they realized that I know a lot more about this than they do. And in order not to be exposed as completely anti-animal, they try to gather together and put me down and try to portray me as radical and mad. But on the other hand, at least there were a number, in a number of television stations, a number of debates on animals, which never were there before on other election campaigns. Then there was a lot of TV interest or media interest in me. On one day, I had four big media interviews and also an hour-long shows on television where I sort of could argue my case also against others. And I was part of head of party talks even. I mean, there were people who are now in government, ministers. I had ministers sit there with me and debate animal protection or especially other issues. I mean, in the head of party talks, I suddenly had to talk about traffic and foreigners coming in and the work and taxes and suddenly all these issues. I mean, I tried to push it onto the animal issue, and I tried to say, okay, it's very interesting, but what about animals? And then the moderators usually said to me, no, we don't talk about animals, we talk about this issue now. So in the head of party talks, I had to come up with a lot of arguments, or escape expressing an opinion, or just say, I haven't got an opinion on this as a party person, or this is my private opinion, blah, blah. But also there were a lot of debates on the animal issue. And there was some support from quite a lot, I have to say, from activists across the country who did demos and also put up placards for me. On the right, you see a placard on the motorway which says, animal protection into parliament, vote for Balluch. And on the left, this was one of the many events we did on the streets where I put up signs with always some topic that we followed. In that case, it's about meat being thrown away. 27% of the meat ends up in the rubbish bin. So what a useless mass production that is. And also I had this big pig, which is on a carriage behind me that has been carried along to a number of such public events where where I was. I mean, it was months where I spent essentially every day on the streets doing campaigning for Vote for Me, which also is a bit weird, but yeah, okay. These are some examples of the material that we produced. All this was essentially for free. There were really people, also professionals, who came up and said, I'm doing this for you, I'm doing this for you for free. The rap, this music piece, was also done in a professional studio by person for free, and musicians were all for free. So there was a lot of support. Yeah, but a lot is relative. Yeah, you know, there was a lot of support, which feels a lot if there are 500 people supporting you, but 500 people is completely negligible compared to the whole election. Yeah, the population that's eligible to vote. Okay, so on the left up, there is this placard that says idealist instead of lobbyist. In the middle, there is vote for animal and climate protection and Martin Balluch. On the right, there's this family picture which says, because it is important to produce empathy within your children for animals. On the left down, you see some people produced, also nothing to do with me, so only volunteers who had this on their own, this idea, produced food that had this vegan food with the label on it, vote for Martin Balluch, and a picture of me with this pig. And a number of placards we produced. On the right bottom, you see one where I am with pigs in a place where they can live happily without being used. And it says, pigs would vote for Martin Balluch. The funny thing is that pigs have such a bad name that a number of times on the media, it was said, and also in the was written, that I actually insult those people who want to vote for me because I call them pigs. They were incapable of seeing this idea that I'm saying, if pigs were eligible to vote like all others are, they would vote for me. They were reading it like those who vote for Martin Balluch are pigs. And this mindset is just so hard to break. But I was still so naive, or in my bubble, that by writing this slogan, I didn't realize that anyone could read it like this, that I'm insulting people voting for me. But this is where our society is at. After decades of campaigning, they still attach to the word pig so negative emotions that they can only read it as an insult. They can't see pigs, even in principle, as some person who might be eligible to vote. This is far more absurd. So they rather twist the statement, the slogan. Okay, but now let's come to the reality of it all. I did have a lot of people talking to me on the streets and saying, yes, super, good on you, we vote for you. So I had the feeling there must be good consequence. There must be a lot of people voting for me. I mean, if every day you meet 5 people or more, then you think that, but then later I realized 5 people who speak to you is just nothing, you know, it's just nothing. Look at the prime minister who goes through the streets. It's not 5 people speaking to him, it's 5,000 people speaking to him, and that is making up the difference. There was also a special bus that traveled to major cities where we could give public talks, but there was little public interest. So we essentially always had the usual animal activist crowd of these well-known faces, but I couldn't reach out to the public in political talks during the election campaign on animal issues. Essentially, what it comes down to is that the people, when they think of elections, that really, in the vast majority, don't think of animal issues. They have other issues that are far more important to them. So if you come up with the animal issue, they don't listen to you and don't come to your public talks. They are not interested. And so these media outlets were actually right in not making animals a topic on the head of politics, political parties talks, because people just aren't interested in enough. They're interested in animal welfare and animal rights, they are in principle, but when it comes to an election, they are far more interested in issues that actually have to do with their lives, infringe it or enable them to do more, or having to pay more taxes. These are all topics that they find far more important. The whole campaign did cost me or us 15,000 euro, which came in donations. So it didn't cost me privately. I wouldn't have that money, but but that was all money spent. There was no other, all other money was sort of virtual by people who did something for the campaign without asking to be paid. As I said, I produced 38 video clips. You can still see them online, but they're all in German, and they had up to 300,000 views. Not everyone had that. Some had only 50,000, some 150,000. But 300,000 views, you know, would be enough for the 4% hurdle. If everybody who saw that video would say afterwards, yes, I vote for that person, we would have come over the hurdle into Parliament. So 4%, 1% in Austria is about 80 to 90,000 votes, and 4% is 320 to 360,000 votes. So if 300,000 and odd people would have voted for me, those that had seen the videos, it would have been enough. We did also a lot of press conferences like other parties did, but there was very little interest. Many press conferences, no media turned up at all. There was only the supportive animal activists who came, but yeah, you know, this doesn't help to get the whole thing into public. So a press conference on animal issues during an election campaign didn't trigger any interest. The TV debates on animals were there, and we could debate it, but there was no one really important from the other parties who participated. As it turned out, they tried to send people who know about animals, but who were not actually MPs today. So these animal spokespeople that the parties chose for these debates during the election campaign, they actually never got into Parliament. And so I debated their sort of bubble. I debated virtual. I debated just with shadows, but not with real political people, and nothing that was said there was of any consequence later. Although at least it became a topic, at least whatever, hundreds of thousands of people watched it, and you could talk about the issues, but of no political consequence. And on all general TV debates where I was invited to be, with talking also with ministers and head of parties even, the animal issue was ignored completely. And I couldn't bring it up. I tried ever so often and said, okay, that's very interesting, but what about the animal? And then they would say, no, we don't talk about animals. It was really always like that. Yes, and on our own election events, I did public speeches in all big cities. There was essentially nobody there apart from the usual animal activist crowd. So an election campaign based on animal welfare, I learned, is nothing that you can trigger a lot of public interest. So we come to the results at the end of the day. The election result was that our party got 2% of the votes, which is only half what was necessary. It's about 200,000 votes. Not even in Vienna, we had 4% of the votes, although Vienna, we would have expected to be the most sympathetic. The Green Party is by far the strongest there. So we had 3.6% of the votes of the Viennese votes, but not 4%. So just too few. But that was the province with the most election percentage. So essentially, at least in this one run or whatever, it failed to overcome this hurdle even in the province with the biggest interest in the issue. Actually, when I talk about this, I realize now that you might think, how could you run with a split-off Green Party person? Because by doing so, you're actually damaging the Green Party, which is true. The votes we have there were probably most likely would have gone to the Green Party otherwise. But still, after looking it all through, we found that, or I did think with many others, that it's worth trying because it's a one-time chance, you know. Without having to get the signatures in every district, thousands of signatures, we can stand for federal elections. And so we wanted to do that. But this is surely a reason why a number of activists did not join the election campaign, because they felt they're damaging the Green Party and they didn't want to damage the Green Party. Actually, while talking about this, the Green Party did have the historical best result at this election. So the 2% would have even boosted that result more. And they are now in government together with the Conservatives. So the Green Party people are ministers. What is really funny is that one person from an environmental protection organization who was in the same situation like me, she was sort of campaigning for a long time as the head of her organization, and I'm for VGT, and she was invited by the Greens to join their campaign, and I was invited by the split-off. And the split-off failed completely, and she had as a primary topic climate change, and she won completely, and she is now Minister of the Environment. So that's how easy it goes. If I had been put to the classic Green Party, maybe, but they are not so interested in animal issues. You know, this is why they didn't invite me. But if I had been there, I might have been now a Minister for Animal Welfare, which is also now a Green Party person, but obviously not somebody who has anything to do with animal protection. Yeah, this is one problem, and one other reason why we stood for these elections, that the Austrian Green Party is not particularly animal friendly. They are more animal friendly than any other party in Austria, but they are not animal friendly at all. At all is possibly said too much, but they are not. This is not an important topic for them. And when they published their coalition government program, there was nothing on animal welfare in it. So they have as their primary goal climate change, but they have nothing for animal welfare in their program. Even though the Green Party is now in parliament and we have a Green Party president in Austria, it all doesn't help the animals because the party isn't interested very much. Okay, as you see on the third point on this slide, I got specific votes for me, 4,483. Specific votes means, I suppose this is everywhere the same, you could vote for a party and then write down a name as the person you vote for in this party. So if the party crosses the hurdle into the parliament, then those people with the most specific votes get the first seats in parliament. And with 4,483, I had very many specific votes, considering that the party had so few percentage. If you look at it, this number of specific votes for me in relation to the amount of votes to the party, I was the person with the 5th most personal votes of all candidates in parliament. Meaning that people who did vote for the party were very interested in getting me into parliament. So I was sort of the trigger for this. But yeah, we were by far not enough to get into parliament. When I asked around in VGT itself, I realized that most people there didn't vote for my party or me. So even within VGT, so even within the animal movement, it wasn't at all so that most people voted for this party. The reason is that they wanted to have a strong Green Party, or they wanted to have, and human rights issues in the forefront, and they felt that I or this party wasn't representing that. So as a matter of fact, even animal people who are long-standing activists and who are very active themselves wouldn't vote for animal issues when it comes to elections. And this is something that I learned during this election campaign. So I come to the conclusions. I have to conclude that animals are not considered a political election issue, even though we have 96% who want better treatment, like in the case of straw for pigs. Only 2% or less even are prepared to vote a party to achieve that. People are not willing to sort of put the animal welfare issue so much in the forefront that they vote, that they put their electoral vote on this. They have other issues that they just find more important, and especially considered in relation to politics. The interesting thing is that people from VGT or other activists I spoke to, they said animal issue is just one single issue and they are not a single issue person. You have to look over the whatever side of the plate and realize that there are many, many other issues and they are altogether more important to them, even though they are very active in animal welfare. So two things I see from that. Firstly, that the animal issue isn't considered political enough. And the other issue is that they don't see the view from animals onto whatever else happens in society as important enough to be represented by a sole party. I want to say a bit more about this topic, but first one other point that I forgot. When there is a scandal, like a very bad situation in a factory farm or a very big abuse of an animal, there recently somebody skinned a cat alive in Austria and it was a very big story in the media. And the people are very outraged about it. And lots of times you hear from media that it's the animal issue that they get the biggest post bag for. There's the biggest number of complaints coming from that. It's even bigger than when it is abuse of children or human rights infringements. So the biggest response comes from when there's an animal issue. And I conclude from the election that actually that people who are sensitive to an animal issue are very vocal. So if you are sensitive to an animal issue, you see there is abuse, then you got to write. Whereas if people who are not sensitive to an animal issue see another issue, they don't actually write about this or even get so worked up that they do something about it. So there's a huge majority, 98% of people who are not enough sensitive to an animal issue, but these 2% are so vocal that you get the impression they are a majority or they are more than 50%. So it reminds me of animals that are totally harmless, but they can stand big and scream and shout. Some of them do that as a mimicry. And it seems that the animal movement is a bit like that. So they are very few, but they can be so loud and so vocal that you get the fear that there is a huge, big crowd, which is bad news for our campaigns, really. But this is what I learned from that campaign. Okay, coming back to this issue that animal activists tell me you can't vote for an animal party because it is a single issue party and we don't want to be single issue. We want to have lots of other issues and they are best placed into the Green Party, even if they are zero interested in animal welfare. So I would, hearing that, I would answer that one can see the animals as a suppressed minority, even though they are not a minority in sheer numbers, but they are an outgroup, socially speaking, and they are suppressed outgroup. And as an outgroup, as a suppressed outgroup, they have an interest in lots of human or other social issues, like the issue of freedom to express your opinion. The animals, the outgroup has this interest because they want humans to speak for them freely. They want a right to protest. They don't want surveillance rights or surveillance possibilities for the government because this hinders expression in favor of their issues. So actually, if you change the view on this thing, that animal issue is not, there's an animal issue and there's a whatever homosexuality issue and the gender issue and the climate issue, just one of many issues, you can see animals as a suppressed outgroup that has actually interest in the whole of society. Why? Because every animal that is in a factory farm here has in its interest, even if he or she doesn't think that consciously, but has it in his or her interest that you can express your opinion, that you can demonstrate that the climate is not changing, that people, that the environment isn't destroyed. So there is actually, from the point of view of these animals, an interest in the whole of what's happening. And one could see an animal party as a spokesperson for this outgroup, for this suppressed minority of non-human animals. But this view switch, change of view, has obviously not arrived even within our movement. But so I would now say that there shouldn't be an animal protection spokesperson for each party, because this is what they call it, animal protection spokesperson. And in our debates, they often were the same as the spokesperson for agriculture. And this is what, and the reason for that is because they said the person who is a spokesperson for agriculture, the farmer, him or herself, knows a lot about animals, and animal protection is best being done, even the Green Party did that, best being done by agricultural people. These are the ones who must do the animal protection. So I would switch that position to say, you're not an animal protection spokesperson, you're an animal spokesperson, a spokesperson for non-human animals and their interests collide diametrically with the interests of agriculture. So actually, you're more like an interest group for a working party, for workers versus those who own the factories. So yeah, this is a switch that I would take with me for the future campaigning, that I'm actually not speaking for animal protection as a cultural value, but I'm speaking for non-human animals. In the name of non-human animals. This is my clientele. These are my sort of the people that or the beings, and you might call them people, that I represent when I speak as a person in VGT or as a politician, which I didn't become. So I end with 4 thoughts. I want to approach my campaigning after 35 years of doing campaigning anyway. I want to approach it a lot more about with the point of view that I am speaking on behalf of non-human animals to all topics, to climate change, to whatever. And I'm speaking on behalf of them because nobody else does, and somebody needs to. Somebody needs to do that. And this is not a single issue. This is actually an issue that touches everything, because non-human animals have an interest in what is happening in human society because they're suppressed by them. And so they want to help. And that plays out in all levels. And yeah, even traffic has, and building new roads has an impact on non-human animals, because there might be rabbits living on the ground where they want to put tarmac on and road over them. And somebody must speak in favor of these animals and say, no, we don't want that road, because there you stay where you are and don't drive around, because you're going over my home and you're tarmacking my living space. So somebody, in all aspects, somebody needs to speak for non-human animals, be their voice. And yeah, and this is not a single issue at all. This is an all-encompassing issue. Another little thought that came to me when I was running this campaign, which seems a bit detached from what I've said now, but I have myself now children and a child who is vegan, and I reach out to vegan parents, and I found, to my eternal surprise, that 90% of vegan parents don't have vegan children. They don't feel strongly enough about this, and they feel threatened by society that puts a weight on children who have to grow up vegan in a non-vegan world. And the connection to this election campaign is that we have lots of people who are vegan and lots of people who are active, but they're not putting this so much in the forefront of their lives that they actually would vote for this issue or devote the life to this issue so much so that they would raise their children vegan. And that gives me the feeling that there's a lot to be done to actually support each other and become an integrated movement. If you think about religious groups, and I'm not saying veganism is a religious group at all, but if you think about that, they would never raise their child in a different religion or a-religious. They would never do this. Yeah, they are so persuaded from this or convinced that this is right, that they would do this. And even if they're a tiny minority in a society, they would never say, oh, this is just too big a burden on my children. They would say this is the right thing to do, so we just do it. Yeah, but the vegans don't. The vegans don't. They, vast majority of them don't. And so what we actually have is that even the vegan parents have then non-vegan, also the vegan parents have non-vegan next generation that we need to persuade again, and they either produce non-vegan next generation. So we eternally run up this hamster wheel if we don't establish a sort of living space for vegans. And so learning from this election, I even conclude that it might be good to found vegan schools, vegan kindergartens, and little vegan communities where we support each other in this way of life and are able to turn it into a real life conviction, not single issue, but complete issue life conviction. And yeah, that I feel is missing. That could then be represented by a party as well, sort of the minority in society. We do in VGT reform campaigns, and you might think the reform campaigns are threatened when we realize that the animal issue just has a support of a tiny minority who are very loud, so that they pretend to be bigger, so it fails. But this is not so, because the 96% who want straw for pigs, they still stand. And they are those that support the public pressure in our reform campaign so that we get new legislation that supports animals. So they're just not prepared to vote for this, but they are prepared to support that issue amongst all the other things that they do and amongst their lives. But they find it important enough to actually speak out on it and are in favor of it. So there's a big difference between those that say to this thing, it outrages me and I find it very awful and I support the change. And those people who say, I find it so important that I give my vote to this instead of to the party that I actually sympathize with. Yeah, you know, this is a big difference. So in animal rights and animal welfare and animal protection, we have to work with this opinion of a vast majority of people, but being aware that they in their own lives think it is a minor issue, but they still think this one thing, this one demand is important. And there might be swing votes. They are not swing votes from their party that they usually have to to an animal party, but there might be swing votes to another party that is similar to theirs, but it's more animal friendly. So still, I think the reform campaigns work as they do. But I learned that it's actually, but I learned to be more humble with this issue, that actually, even though so many people speak to me and so many people shout out when there is a scandal, the vast majority of people still today, to this day in society, think the animal issue is just a little fringe single issue that is not as important as human rights issues.
Martin, I do not want to interrupt you, but the presentation is coming to an end.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't think that, I thought 10 minutes are for the questions, but they are not. Yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah, but it's completely okay because it's going to be a coffee break, so we can find time for some of the questions, okay, and then we can start with the coffee break. But yeah, I just wanted to remind you.
Yes, okay. Other questions? I have, my last sentence would have been that direct democracy is an answer, possibly, like in Switzerland, where you have a certain vote on only one issue instead of a vote for parties for the next 5 years. So direct democracy might be very good for animal welfare. Yeah,
there are some of the questions in Slido, and there is one question that like most people are interested in. It's, what advice would you give to activists in other countries who are doing or considering doing this type of activism, running for an election?
What advice? Yeah, my experience is negative, you know, it's a failure. So my advice is keep your fingers off it. No. Yeah, I think it's a very, very difficult path. And I'm not sure how to approach it. I mean, if you look at the Dutch Animal Party, which is probably the most successful, it has now, I think, about 4% or even 5 or 6%. They started out with only 0.75%, and the Dutch system allows an MP or 2 MPs with that little amount of votes. Maybe if I had run this campaign or in the next elections, one day we would cross the 4% hurdle. So this is not out of the question. But nevertheless, it is a long path there, and there's a lot of hurdles to overcome that are not easy at all. I, for myself, learned that I'm well placed within my NGO. I think this is a place where you can be very idealistic and also honest, pretty honest, not completely honest, but pretty honest, which you can't as a politician. This is another thing I learned, because I met lots of them before the DV debates and then during the debate, and this is completely different people. Before the debate, they express opinions that they would never in public. So the whole politics is a lie. I learned that they are all shambles. They all pretend to have certain opinions that they actually don't have. And this is also an aspect of the whole thing that sort of keeps me from getting into politics, because this is just so much just positioning or pretending. Yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't discourage people to try it themselves. I think it's hard work, and maybe they should raise more money like I did, and also more money than I did or we did, and also do placards in a much bigger aspect. Because I mean, if you see, 15,000 euro is what I had as a budget, and the other parties have 7 million euros, 10 million euro. I mean, this is just incomparable. Yeah, you know. So if you have a lot more money, obviously you can do a lot more. But where to get from? Who is paying? Who is paying for that?
Yes, definitely. Okay, there is the next question. Have you or your colleague activists considered joining or tried to join other bigger parties and trying to get a chance to go to elections with them?
Yes, this is possibly the better way. There's a number of animal activists who sort of drifted into the Green Party and also into the Social Democratic Party, and it does play out a bit, but obviously it's a year-long project. It's not something you can't go there and barge in and say, now we do something completely different. So it's a slow process, but these parties are big and established, the Green Party as well, and it's not easy to change their basic line of being for years. We have, for example, have an MP now who is spokesperson for animal issues for the Green Party, who is vegan and radically outspoken. But she came sort of from the side. She wasn't really as a spokesperson in the election campaign. But she still didn't manage to change the baseline of the party to have more animal issues in government talks, or it's just a tiny small influence, and that has to grow. So I would strongly suggest to slide into other parties and try to change them. But again, be aware, you have to deal mostly with human issues, and it is a year-long project, nothing that can be done from one to the next day.
Okay, and now we have time for one more question. It's going to be, I worry that the interest in a vegan animal party from outsiders is mainly for entertainment, that it is seen as a freak show or sort. What do you think?
Again, that an animal party is only considered a joke. Is that so?
Yeah, that it is seen as a freak show or of sort.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, this is the conclusion. Also, freak show is a bit said too much. It's a conclusion. I mean, people understand welfare and they are in favor of welfare, and in some topics, big majorities are in favor, but they don't think that it's a political issue. It's more a personal issue. Decent people behave properly to animals, but not political parties need to have a political animal program. This is sort of the attitude of most people. So it has no place in the elections. Elections are not about animal policies. Animal policies are a different matter. This is, I think, the primary attitude. An animal party is in that case, in that sense, a freak because it makes a topic to a political topic that isn't supposed to be one, in the opinion of most people, I would say.
Okay, and right now is probably time for the coffee break. So I would like to thank you, Martin, for your amazing presentation. And I think that everybody enjoyed it, as I can see also in the comments in the group chat. So thank you very much.
Thank you.